Good evening. I would like to say again how good it is to see everyone here this evening. I'm glad to see I didn't run too many people off with the idea of me being back up here. Sometimes twice in one day of me is just about too much for some people. You can ask David about that. I'm sure he'll attest to that. But it's good to see everyone here, both those of our number and those of you who are visiting with us. We're glad you have chosen to visit with us, and we invite you back whenever the opportunity presents itself. And with that being said, we'll go ahead and get into the lesson of this evening. And for this evening's sermon, I'd like to look into the idea of what is in a name. And this idea comes from a radio program that used to come on locally early of the mornings in Monticello. If you're from there and listen to the local country station, 93.1, you probably heard the keys to confident living. And it played for maybe 5 minutes or so, segments to give you, keys to confident living. A short motivational story and maybe a Bible verse at the end for some encouragement. And I was listening one day at work, and the bit that morning was on this idea of what's in a name and the importance of having a good name or reputation among people that you are around in the community and among the community as a whole. The story that was shared, and I can't quite remember the whole thing. I couldn't find it online anywhere to get the full story, but the idea was about a young man who had moved away from his home county, and after a while he decides to move back and wanted to buy back some land that once belonged to his family. He went and knocked on the now owner of the properties he was wanting to buy his door, who was the owner of the neighboring farm, and an elderly man opened the door, and the young man told him his name and told him he would like to buy the property that joined his, in which was the man just swiftly said no. Let down, the young man walks back to his car, and as he begins to drive away, the old man said, "Wait just 1 minute. What did you say your name was?" The young man told him again and said that used to be his family's farm. And the old man kind of perked up and smiled a little and asked who his grandfather was. And then the young man told him, and the older man said, "Yeah, I remember him. He was a good man." And after a second thought, the old man said, "You know what, maybe we can work something out." And he ended up selling the young man back his family's old home place. I think the reason that this story has stuck with me even after all these years is because this very thing, this idea of a preconceived notion made towards you based on your name, which to be clear nowadays would be our last name, happens to me all the time, especially in a pretty rural community. Countless times I have been somewhere and they have asked me what my name was. And usually the next question is, well, who are your grandparents? And I'm always pretty proud to say who they were. Quite a few people knew both of them, my father's father and my mother's father. And I'm just as happy as can be when they say that they knew them and to hear stories about them. Both of them are no longer with us, and it really just brightens my day to hear these things. Once they know them, know that I am their grandson, they then measure my character by my grandparents' good character. And then it is up to me to keep that up. When I was studying for this lesson, I just went to Google and I simply typed in the search bar, "What's in a name?" I then came across a quote from the famous play Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare. And in the play, Juliet says, "What's in a name? That which we call a rose by any other word would smell as sweet." She is telling Romeo that she loves the person, not the name. or the family he comes from. Juliet is grieving over Romeo's last name, Montague, which is the name of her family's enemies. She argues that the name is unimportant and that a person's intrinsic qualities are what matters most. Now, I do agree to the extent that no, we shouldn't judge and consider one lowlier or lesser, or mark someone off as a bad egg, or anything like that they're no good or no count for whatever it is, or in Juliet's family's case, a despised enemy solely based on what someone's last name is. Another honorable mention of this would be the infamous Appalachian feud between the Hatfield and McCoys. They were sworn enemies, not just between two guys with the last name Hatfield and McCoy, but their entire family. They were fighting it out over just the name, killing one another even. There is a part of this, however, I do disagree with. I think this idea of one working diligently in the eyes of the world, showing good morals and good character, and then amplifying that when we become a Christian is a biblical truth. Will you look with me in the Old Testament book of Proverbs in chapter 22? Proverbs chapter 22 and in verse 1, it says, "A good name is to be chosen rather than great riches, and favor is better than silver or gold." Most people in the world today, given the chance to have a good name or a large sum of money, will most of the time take the money. And you can just about plug any scenario in that, blank over money. Everybody would, not everybody, but most will take the money and run. And that would be because it is the easiest thing to do. As a reputation, it can take a while, or as a name, it can take a while to build a good one. It doesn't take so long to make a bad one for yourself, though. As many have heard it said about someone might say, they've really made a name for themselves. This means that they've developed some kind of reputation. The word reputation is defined one way as a widespread belief that someone or something has a particular habit or characteristic. You can now see how this would be important when we claim the name Christian. When we identify ourselves with the name Christian, it is up to us every day to work and to prove that reputation, and that is done by how we conduct ourselves in the world around us. A New Testament example of this can be found in the book of 1 Peter in chapter 2. I have it up there on the board, but if you'd like to join me in your Bibles there to 1 Peter in chapter 2, you can. Where it says here in verse 12, "Keep your conduct among the Gentiles honorable, so when they speak against you as evildoers, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day of visitation." Becoming a Christian and taking on the name Christian is not a light duty. When it says to conduct ourselves honorably, that means to act in a way that physically and visually separates us from the rest of the world, just as Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians in chapter 6, and I got that here for you as well. 2 Corinthians in chapter 6, "Go out from their midst and be separate from them, says the Lord." A reputation or characteristic of a Christian are people who separate themselves from worldly works of the flesh. We all know Galatians chapter 5 lists quite a few of these things, and I'll read them out here too. In Galatians chapter 5, the works of the flesh are listed as immorality, impunity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, strife, jealousy, fits of anger, rivalries, dissensions, divisions, envy, drunkenness, orgies, and things like these. That was quite the list. And obviously, with Paul saying things like these, we know that there are many more that were not listed. One thing that really ruins the reputation or the name Christian, really tarnishes the name Christian, is when someone expresses that they are one. One thing that really proves that you never separated yourself from the world, I believe, is from using foul language. There's no better way, I would say, to prove that you are not really making a name for yourself as a Christian is to cuss or curse. Use cuss words or curse words, whatever you may have heard it as. Let's look at Matthew chapter 26. Matthew chapter 26. And we'll look there in verse 74. Here we have Peter following Jesus after Jesus got arrested. And this is also after Jesus tell everyone that they will scatter. And Peter says to Jesus, they might fall away, but I will not fall away. And then Jesus then foretells of Peter's denial. Here we have Peter in the courtyard, and he gets recognized. He gets recognized for being with Jesus, being a follower of Christ. And he starts to try to lie his way out of it. When he realizes that just lying is getting nowhere with the people, he begins to curse and swear. And what he's saying here with the language that he is using, see how I talk? Do you see how I am talking? I don't know this man. I don't follow this man. I'm not a follower of his. If I was, would I be talking this way? Now, he didn't say that in so many words, but the idea of him using curse words and swear words was that. And people might say there is the idea that he was just provoking a curse and swearing upon himself, that this kind of cursing and swearing ain't like what we get the idea of today. But really, it is all just the same, because it's still the language that we use. We as humans have set parameters of language, and within that language we have somehow came across these words that mean some pretty awful things when they are used, and we know what they are. Society kind of picks these words out and deems them to be unfit for everyday language. They're called cuss words, foul words, whatever you want to call them. There's many excuses that, these are just words, that these just are different words that mean the other thing. So if you say one thing, you might as well be saying this. I think those are pretty weak arguments. People might say, take the Lord's name in vain. They might say, oh, Jesus Christ, or they might swear to God, or OMG, or something like that. And they say, oh, well, I didn't mean anything by it. Well, my friend, that was the sin of it. That you do not take the Lord's name seriously enough to mean anything by it when it comes out of your lips. These excuses for using foul language, like I said, there's really no better way to say, I do not follow Christ in your language than is to use these things. If you remember the lesson from this morning when we are facing Christ on judgment and the books are open, and he asked you, what is the deal with all this language? Why didn't you season your words with salt or bridle your tongue? Why didn't you refrain from this kind of talk? And you'll say, well, Jesus, these were just words that we just made up. These were just something that means something else. It's kind of silly what some people think. I don't really think your excuses are going to hold up too much at judgment. And I fear for that might not get you very far if that's the case. The name Christian means to be someone who follows Jesus the Christ. A Christian is someone whose life has been saved by God's grace through the gospel, the good news about Jesus. Living in a way that is guided by Jesus and his values, which include showing love, mercy, and grace to others. Being a Christian means to be like Jesus. Maybe someone here has taken the name Christian and maybe not have separated themselves and has a reputation, if you will, for living worldly. The characteristics of someone who lives as Jesus lived while he was here on earth doesn't really come to mind when you even think of yourself. Maybe there's some people out here in the world that know you and even when they think of you, they know that, yeah, you might come to church. But as far as when they hear your name or think of your reputation, they don't really think of you as a devout Christian. That's not you in their mind when they hear your name. Party animal, maybe. An old barfly, possibly. A womanizer, a real ladies' man. Maybe even an old runaround Sue. I don't know. I think you get the idea. The problem is, we're taking this name too lightly. If this relates to you in any way, we'd love to see that you are convicted enough to make a change in your life for the better. It really is. Whether you've come to Christ before, but you found it really hard to separate yourself from the world, if you'd make it known, we'd love to help you any way we can. We'd love to pray for you and encourage you. Maybe you're here this evening and you've not yet given yourself to Christ. There's no time like the present to put on Christ and walk in newness of life, taking on this name as a Christian. If I can echo back to my sermon this morning and piggyback off of it just a little bit, there is a judgment coming, and it's going to be coming for all of us. So why not tonight? Whatever your needs may be, please make it known as we stand and as we sing.